So yesterday, the clocks went back, giving all of us an extra hour, but that's stupid, because Sunday's the day of rest, so what's the point in getting an extra hour when we're all supposed to be doing nothing anyway? Nobody plans for a busy Sunday, so essentially you're taking the day where people need the extra time the least and giving them an extra hour. Or you're giving them an extra hour of sleep on Saturday's night, which leaves them well rested for, again, a day of doing pretty much nothing. I've been trying to take my Sabbath a little bit more seriously and not doing any work on Sunday, so I'm only just realizing how silly this is. You know when people would actually appreciate an extra hour's sleep? Sunday night, which is to say Monday morning. It's the first day of the week, you want to start things on the right track, so what better way to do that than making it feel like you're sleeping in until 8 when actually you're getting up at 7. I hate when my Monday mornings don't start right. When I wake up late, I'm already behind schedule, so I'm rushing to get things done and even skipping things I was supposed to be doing. When I start doing my work, I just feel in a bad mood because my Monday mornings set the tone for the whole day and maybe even for the whole week. That's why this year I just pretended the clocks went back on Monday. I woke up on Sunday morning at 5:40, which to me felt like 6:40, and then I just went through the rest of the day acting as if the clocks hadn't changed, except for the fact I went to church at what was 11:30 from my perspective. But aside from that, I just treated it as any other day. And then when I went to bed, for me it was 10:30, but technically it was still only 9:30, so I got an extra hour of sleep and woke up Monday morning feeling rejuvenated. So that's my first new law about changing the clocks. They should go back Monday at midnight, setting people up for a restful Sunday night and a productive Monday morning. I guess with this said, some people might ask, should the clocks even be going back in the first place? Spoiler alert, yes. A lot of people describe the clock change as outdated, which seems obviously wrong. It only started like a century ago. I'm not even sure what was apparently happening then, which no longer happens now, such that we can justify moving on from it, but frankly, I don't care. I just say that right now, in the year of our Lord 2025, I appreciate the clock change a lot. Firstly, I never like the last few days of October when you're waking up and it's still dark. Getting up in the middle of the night sucks. Unless you're planning some sort of romantic watching the sunrise thing, I get it can sometimes be peaceful, but for the most part, it's just annoying. But then the clocks go back, and what was 7:40 is now 6:40, and the sun has an extra hour to start its day before I have to start mine. That's good. It just sucks a bit in January when even with the clocks changing, it's still dark in the morning because, solstice. But then imagine how much worse that would be if the clocks didn't change. I don't like having to wait until 8 a.m. for the sun to rise. Imagine if I had to wait until 9. Ridiculous. Okay, so we need to move the clocks back so that the sun has time to rise, so we're not all forced to be like lazy slobs waiting until 9 a.m. before we can get up because that's on the sun's schedule. But of course that was the original format before daylight savings time, so I don't really need to justify it. That's what we all agree is good. The real question then would be, why should we have the clocks change in the summer? What's the point in that? Well, because the sun rises at ridiculous o'clock in the British summer. Even with the clocks changing, it still rises at 4:30 in the morning. So if we didn't have daylight savings time, it would be rising at 3:30. Not even performative influencers are getting up at that time. That's not an early morning, that's a late night. All of that daylight before anyone's woken up would be essentially wasted, and we miss out on one of the joys of summer, the sun staying up long into the evening, in the UK setting at 9:30 at the latest time. If it's hot outside, you want to be enjoying the day for as long as possible, sat in the garden in the evening, having a cold drink. I don't need to tell you how to enjoy the summer. So if you want bright, productive, happy mornings in winter, but also bright outdoor evenings in summer, the clocks have to change at some point in the year. The main argument people make about this is, but when the clocks change, it messes up people's sleeping schedules. They'll say, if only we didn't have daylight savings time, no one would have to deal with changing their clocks and readjusting their sleeping pattern. Now, ignoring the fact that when the clocks go back, the change to sleeping pattern is actually welcome, there's another issue of this logic. Many people travel abroad, and even Americans who never travel abroad can still experience multiple time zones without leaving their country. I was recently on holiday in America and I had to deal with a 5-hour time change twice in as many weeks. But you know what? I manage, like millions of people do every year. Now, sure, not everybody does, but a massive number of people do go abroad to somewhere in Europe or even further afield. And that means acting as if this daylight savings clock change happening once a year is the worst thing ever comes across as kind of ridiculous. Considering daylight savings time does confer benefits as already addressed, it would be stupid to get rid of it just so we don't have to deal with clock changes that most people will have to deal with anyway throughout the year as a matter of course. And even if you don't go abroad, do you ever have nights when you stay up late or sleep in? Who is all of this concern about sleep schedules even for, except for a tiny proportion of the population who are so strict about their sleep schedule that it's a massive burden for them to have to alter it twice a year. So yeah, I just think this idea that changing the clocks is some intrinsic burden isn't really a thing for most people. I should shout out those who don't even like the end results of daylight savings time because they don't like the darker evenings in the winter. My instinct is to say, well, the early bird catches the worm. You're not missing out on any daylight in the winter if you wake up early, and if you do that, that will probably make you happier and more productive. Like, yeah, if you wake up late and go to bed late, then you will miss out on a lot of daylight, but that's sort of just your choice. Personally, I like when it starts to get dark early in the evenings. It makes it easier to relax more as you feel like the whole world is with you in a semi-hibernation. Also, it means you can keep heat in the house by closing all the blinds and curtains, which would be weird to do if it was still daylight outside, so it's saving on your heating bill. My wife and I got some curtains with thermal properties, so I'm kind of excited to be closing the curtains at 4 p.m. and seeing if the house stays warm just from the heat generated by our bodies. The total amount of daylight isn't changing for most people no matter what, but I'd rather sleepy, relaxed, dark evenings than to have those same qualities imposed on my mornings. So yeah, I like daylight savings time, and I don't relate to those who persistently complain about it every time it rolls around, especially those who act like opposing daylight savings time is a self-evidently rational, progressive position. Like I say, we can use the extra hour for good if we afford people some extra sleep on Monday morning. But I do get that losing an hour of sleep in the spring objectively sucks, even if compensated for by the promise of longer days. And yes, we'll lose at least an hour when traveling, but we sort of expect our routines to be thrown off when traveling, whereas it's a bit more jarring if you're just sat at home doing nothing and suddenly you've lost an hour out of nowhere. However, there's a solution here too. The clocks should go forward on Friday. Now yeah, first of all, this gives people the entire weekend to adjust to the change. But more to the point, that's assuming it happens Friday night, which I don't think it should. People shouldn't be losing an hour's sleep. Instead, time should jump forward, hear me out with this, during the day in Friday, thus making people's working day 1 hour shorter. So you'd be sat at work, excited for the weekend, the clock says 2:59, and then 1 minute later it says 4 p.m. and you only have an hour to go until it's time to leave. I realize not everyone works 9 to 5, but I think it should be mandated by law that whenever you're working at this specific day, everybody is entitled to get an hour off from their typical shift. In fact, it should be mandated that if it happens before your shift, then you get to come in an hour later, so you don't have people panicking because they thought they had an hour to get to work and suddenly they're running late. But for most people, they get to leave an hour early, which would make the clocks jumping forward function as kind of just a tiny bit of an extra holiday. Yes, I realize that it changing during the day would be a little bit more confusing as it would impact people during daytime activities, but I'm not sure that's a bad thing. At least it would make people more aware of it, as opposed to going to sleep one night and waking up the next morning to find out you're an hour behind schedule. Maybe mandate it so any public transport announcements or appointment reminders have "the clocks change" written in big capitals on the day. I'm sure people wouldn't like thinking they've left an hour to get to the airport only to suddenly see that time disappear, although on the subject, that kind of gets at a larger point, which is that not everything that's happening that matters to someone is happening during the day anyway. Because a lot of people have flights at irregular hours anyway, so if you've got a flight during the springtime that it's 1 a.m, you might leave your house sometime to get there at 12, but then by the time you get there at 12, suddenly it's 1 a.m. already and the flight's leaving. So no matter what, there's a risk that people might get confused, and I think people would rather have that confusion accompanied by the nice revelation that at least they're getting off of work an hour early. So there we go. If I was in charge of daylight savings time, that would mean brighter mornings in winter, longer evenings in summer, an extra hour of sleep before the Monday grind, and an hour off of work in advance of the weekend. So vote for me.